I'm not that flattered. You clapped for the chairs. My name is Peter Sagal. I am the host of NPR's Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. I am also, and I'm very pleased and honored to tell you this, I'm going to be hosting an official podcast for The Plot Against America with David Simon. That'll come out when the show is released. And that, I think, is all any of you want to hear from me. So, it is my pleasure to introduce to you the creator and some of the principal cast of The Plot Against America. First, executive producer and creator, Mr. David Simon. Thank you, thank you. In the role of Evelyn, Miss Winona Ryder. In the role of Herman Levin, Mr. Morgan Spector. And finally, as the esteemed Rabbi Bengelsdorf of Newark, New Jersey, Mr. John Turturro. We don't have a lot of time. Let me just start by saying all of you are people who can choose from among a lot of things what you want to do with your time. Why this and why now? It's kind of a layup.
I can't choose as much as these guys. So I was like, yeah, that sounds great. Let's do it. For all of the obvious reasons, for David, for Roth, for the, for that sweet HBO paycheck.
Yeah. And of course, John, you had played every other kind of Jew to this point.
But you are a little bit.
Yes.
Didn't you do 23?
Yeah. I mean, my wife is Jewish. My kids are Jewish. So, I mean, I grew up in New York City, so I'm basically Jewish.
Yeah, no.
And a little Italian.
I
So,
thought
yeah.
you did the 23andMe.
Yeah.
And you were like 9%.
Yeah. Got like 1 point.
Ashkenazi.
Yeah. I thought I would be Sephardic, but no.
David, you were offered a chance to adapt this some years ago, and you said no.
I did. I was offered a chance to do it right after Obama's second inaugural, and I enjoyed the novel. I thought it was a departure for Roth, a very interesting, but I thought it feels like an artifact. It didn't feel like where the country was at. I was wrong. And I came back to it. I'm embarrassed at how much I denigrated the idea in 2013 and how desperately I embraced it in 2016.
Did all of you read the novel either immediately before the project or prior?
Yeah,
And yes, Miss Ryder. And
I thought we were all raising.
no, it's all fine. And what did you think when you read the novel? Did you read it once you were involved in this project?
No, I read it when it came out. I'm a huge Philip Roth fanatic, and I remember when I read it because I went to Book Soup in LA and got it the day that it.
Book Soup, yes.
And I went home and I started it, and it was daylight, and I was reading it, and you know when you forget that there's a lamp and you start moving closer to the window,
yeah.
And it's getting dark, and then you realize, oh, I have a lamp. So I read it in one sitting, but as I do, I think most of his books.
Yeah.
And I was, I like David said, back then it was, Bush and.
It was 2004, I think.
Yeah,
that's right.
but it didn't, it's a brilliant book.
Yeah.
It's
It's weirdly prescient, not in terms of events, but in terms of the feeling of how it feels when things start to go off kilter.
Yeah, and
That's right.
I had definitely, because of my own personal, my own family's history, it was really interesting. It's an alternate history, obviously, but I did lose family in World War II, including my grandfather, who fought the Nazis, and people, relatives in the concentration camp. So I think it's hard if you are a grandchild or child of European Jews, it's hard not to be untouched by the book.
Yeah.
And you know, there's I think there's an expression, and I don't know it exactly, but something that I read, interview a long time ago that I read that Leonard Cohen said about how so much was wiped out in an afternoon. I mean, you think of all the Bob Dylans and all of the artists, just everyone that was just wiped out in just day after day. And yes, the reparation, you know, we go after the Nazi war criminals, but he put it in this way, and he said it's like putting nail polish on claws. And I felt that was...
Putting nail polish on claws, meaning...
I don't really know.
Okay.
But I was
Leonard
like,
Cohen,
oh.
you don't have to know.
I mean, everything he says to me
Yeah,
is like, oh my God, haunting. but that nail polish on claws, I did think about in terms of our dynamic in the book, me and John's.
Yeah, characters.
Yeah.
Actually, that's something I wanted to...
Sorry for being long-winded.
No. Something I wanted to ask you guys about, because I don't think this is much of a spoiler, but John's character, Rabbi Bengelsdorf, and Winona's character, Evelyn, are sort of the villains of the piece, in the sense that, you know, of course, there's great villainy out there with Lindbergh and his various followers, but you are the people who, especially Bengelsdorf, who avidly joins this effort, the Lindbergh administration.
I think, you know, most of the people in the United States in 1940 were isolationists.
Yeah.
The immigration gates were closed in 1924 to all the Jews, Italians, and the Poles. There were quotas. There was the whole eugenics movement, which helped close the gates. A lot of books were written in this country that influenced the National Socialists in Germany. So we were not, you know, and people wanted to assimilate. And I think if you were an immigrant, you did have a target on your back. So I think, you know, when you talk about people who want to collaborate or want to negotiate, like Chamberlain and all these other people, you know, there are people who are deeply misguided. And I thought when I read the book, and David and I discussed it, it reminded me of a chapter in The Drowned and the Saved by Primo Levi about Romkowski, who was the king of the Lodz ghetto. And that essay has always been imprinted on my brain, yeah. And how misguided he was by trying to save some of the population.
Right. He thought if he collaborated with the Nazis, then maybe
right.
he could save some when he...
And it's a great example, and Levy takes it apart beautifully, and I know Roth was a big fan of his, and I think he was influenced by that.
Yeah. I was reading, Winona, that you actually had kind of trouble getting yourself into Evelyn's head in that regard.
I mean, I did, I think, after when John and I first sort of started talking about it, and with David and Minky, and I saw that John was going full throttle, drinking the Kool-Aid, absolutely, like, fully believing every word he's gonna say, and he's like my favorite actor, and he's so convincing that my fear was that he was so good, and he is so good, that he was gonna make sense to people.
But I think that's the whole challenge when we do these things, is for people to recognize themselves in, you know, you can't play evil.
Yeah, no.
People, to recognize that you have that in you if you just go a little bit in the wrong direction. Yeah. And it's your job to kind of hold a mirror, I mean, not to quote Hamlet, but up to nature. And that is a big part of nature. And to deny it is a lie. It's a real lie,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So
I think in that same Leonard Cohen interview, he talked about how they're having homicidal tendencies in everybody, like humans do have that, and the trick is to figure it out and to give people a square deal and to, make a world where, it's not so easily.
I mean, David's
You
made his
have
whole
a
career based on
baby.
that.
My whole,
I'm sure you
His whole
I'm a
career is
producer.
based on that.
Yeah.
just want
Homicidal
people
tendencies
to
are
think.
pretty much in the job description.
No, I mean about the gray zone.
Yeah.
I mean,
I
the
didn't
gray
think
zone
about
that
that.
occurs between people. That's
Yeah.
what I meant. So.
You're just ultimately Stringer Bell in a different suit.
Yeah.
Morgan, I wanted to ask you this because your role is the one of the most avid resistance, right? Your character, Herman, he's the guy who's not going to put up with this. He gives both Rabbi Bengelsdorf and Evelyn a piece of his mind eventually. And I wanted to know, after going through the whole production, what you thought of the value of that, because it doesn't always work out to just be the guy saying no, and I'm not going to let this happen.
Yeah, it doesn't.
I didn't get that question.
I mean, I think that's fun. That's sort of the fundamental struggle in in 11 families between Herman, who feels like that is enough. That if you stand your ground and you fight injustice when you can, then you're sort of doing your duty as a citizen.
Yeah.
And as an American, that's your sort of sacred obligation. But I think there's a question of, at a certain point, the times become so, I don't know, to just continue with the Hamlet theme, out of joint. Is that Hamlet? Did I fuck that up?
Time is out of joint.
Anyway,
Yeah.
I might be Macbeth.
No, that was Hamlet.
Okay, good. That just resisting, just protesting, just sort of fighting injustice in that limited way is not enough, and you have to run, or you have to really, you have to, I don't know, take up arms or something like that. And I think Herman doesn't see that point. He feels like he'll speak up, and that'll be enough.
Yeah, and one of the very frightening things about this particular miniseries in the novel is it's actually not enough, as you say. Opening it up a little, did doing this give you guys any insight? Well, I was about to say a hypothetical situation. Did
hypothetical.
Purely hypothetical. Just imagine something like that was going on, say, now. Do you guys have any insight? Because again, the show is about different modes of resistance. There are people who accommodate, people who collaborate, people who flee. Did you guys have any sense, and David, please, you too, about how you would or would want to behave in a time like that or in a crisis like that?
That's the reason to do the show. The verdict on 1940 and on Lindbergh and on isolationism and on Hitler and on the Holocaust, that verdict is in. There's no real purpose in legislating it or arguing it again. The reason that the book needed to get made right now is obvious, is that
There was a swastika at Bernie Sanders' rally
right.
Yep.
Right. I mean, it's in the ether now, and
yesterday.
what Roth did and did so brilliantly was he created this extended family, and all 4 members of the nuclear, in our case, Levin, he asked for the name to be changed, family, and by extension, Evelyn and Alvin, the extended family. They all occupy different places on the spectrum of how do you respond when the norms and fundamentals of a republic, of your society, are being challenged in the most basic way. How do where do you stand? Do you resist? Do you acquiesce? Do you speak up? Do you get quiet? Do you run? Do you fight? And all of them, all 6 characters who have point of view in this piece as we structured it, they have to wrestle with that. And that's what's so brilliant about the book. It's a parlor drama in which everyone acquires history through a living room, effectively. I mean, we dance out of it a little bit, but The truth is, that's where we're all at right now. That's where all of us as citizens are right now, is what do we do about this? And you have to ask yourself where in 5 or 10 years, looking back on this moment in American history, where you stood, what you said, how you behaved, whether you stood up when it was somebody else who was vulnerable. These questions are like, they're for you, they're for your own conscience, they're for your grandkids. I mean, this is the moment. And so Roth basically put it in this family, and you get to watch this family torment itself about what to do. And that's the metric that I think works in the piece, that we're all in that same moment of the Levin family right now.
And then also, I just thought, and also then there's these little kids.
Oh yeah,
You
I mean
know?
they're just they're the absolute audience to this moment of whether people are gonna, what's right, what's wrong, and what the cost of being right or wrong is.
That's right.
It's the best part of the book, really, is the parlor drama of this family.
Did you guys, in the making of this, learn anything about how this happens? I mean, there's the Sinclair Lewis novel, It Can't Happen Here.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is a novel about it happening here.
Right.
We know now it's not that unrealistic. Do you guys have any insight from the work that you did on this particular project about how that could happen here? How a democracy like ours could fall under the spell of a Charles Lindbergh? How so many people could go along with these
I mean, we didn't even need a Charles Lindbergh.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, the thing about Lindbergh was he was an absolute hero. He was a brave man, an incredible aviator.
Jimmy Stewart.
Yeah,
and
charming.
the Flight of
Cowlick.
Lewis, yeah.
Yeah.
Right, Jimmy Stewart, Cowlick, Midwestern clip, self-effacing. He had all the charm and heroism of a great man.
A tragedy that he, with his son.
But I mean, we, it wasn't as if, our country was completely immune from what was happening in other places.
Right.
I mean, we had many people here who were, had influenced the National Socialists. I mean, one of the books by Madison Grant called The Passing of the Great Race was a book that was used during the Nuremberg trials as evidence that the United States had influenced Germany's way of thinking. So, there was a relationship.
Yeah.
It wasn't, there was a Nazi party here, but there was a relationship. And so I don't think it's as, in retrospect, everything is like we were on the right side and, they didn't want to go, that we were forced to go into the war.
I'm so glad that it's just, I think, on the radio, but the USS St. Louis.
Oh, we mentioned it.
Yeah, because that was such a huge thing that I heard about.
That's the
growing up.
book of, the
ship.
boat of Jewish refugees that was turned away.
They could literally see their relatives, and it was, we turned them away, and they were all killed.
Do you,
No, just to that, just to your original question, I did read that book, the Sinclair Lewis book, right before we started, and it was written in 1939 in the aftermath of the Depression, and I think that was this moment where, total economic collapse had really called our entire political system into question, and there was this real, was it going to be fascism, was it going to be communism, what was going to rise to take its place, because clearly what we had wasn't working, and we had a similar moment, and we haven't really recovered from it in any material way. I think there are a lot of people in the world or in our country who still feel like we haven't come back from 2008 in any, the thing of people who, all these homeowners, the symbolism of that, the symbolism of saying the banks are more important than all of you people whose homes are underwater, we don't care. That hasn't been fixed. And so I think that those are the kinds of conditions when, I don't know, to me, reading that Sinclair Lewis novel and then Roth's novel sort of in tandem and seeing these sort of twin economic catastrophes that made both of these stories really relevant.
Because exactly right, the train is never late after that.
Yeah,
right after that comes, okay, you've been disadvantaged, you've been put on the outside of the system you believed in. Now we're going to tell you about these other people who are very different from you, who are newer arrivals, who aren't quite as American as you, the melanin isn't quite right. They're not worshiping the same God. They're from countries that you might want to suspect of being incapable of producing potential Americans. I mean, the vernacular is the same. It's been the same since, you go back to the know-nothings in the 1840s. It's the same train leaving the station every time. It's like, these people are not going to be Americans like you need them to be Americans.
Right.
So get up on your horse and fight, because you can't let them in. Right. And in 1940, that's the reason to do it again. In 1940, Roth was using Jewish Americans who were the vulnerable cohort. But today it's black and brown people, and it's Muslims, and it's recent immigrants, and it's the people that a demagogue can use. It's also Jews. It's not to say that there's not more anti-Semitism, but that's because whenever there's intolerance, throw that in. There's always room to blame the Jews. But the people who are being, separated from their families at the southern border, the people who are being, who are being dragged out of airports or dragged into customs offices at airports 2 months into this administration, they were the ones being othered in the same way as this novel. And Roth, he wrote about what he knew and what he remembered from his childhood, and rightly so, as writers do. But he was aware that he had backed into it being perfectly allegorical to this moment where it's not about anti-Semitism per se. It's about something more fundamental and bigger and universal, which is whoever's the latest in through the door, they can be maligned. They can be used as fuel to obtain and retain political power.
Is this an American phenomenon, a human phenomenon, that we're always ready to turn on the other? We're always looking for another to turn on?
I remember asking you, just very genuinely, because at the time, stuff at the border was so upsetting to me. I mean, obviously it's a complicated issue, I know, but the stuff with the children, but I remember saying, was it always like this? And it just became,
I think it's a human.
Okay?
It's a human.
Or was it,
I know what you mean.
You know what I mean?
Has something profoundly changed in America, or was it always like this and we were lying to ourselves?
And I was just so naive.
Yeah.
I never thought I'd see a swastika in my adult, for a real, I saw them at a Black Flag show.
Yeah,
or,
well, sure.
There'd always be a couple of those guys, but
You went to Black Flag shows? Can we devote the rest of this conversation to that?
But I never thought I'd see one on national television, a march. I just never, and so I felt very naive in a way. And because, I guess, of Obama
No, it's like we're in a reconstruction period now. Obama was the president, and we took a couple steps forward, and there was a big rebellion to it,
Yeah.
and he inherited the worst job possible, in 2008, and you see what that is, and it's very interesting, the level of just uncomfortability from some people who are not doing well, so they have to blame someone. But I think it's a human thing, not just American.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I remember you were talking about France and just,
You're seeing it throughout Western Europe.
It's right.
But I think that one of the things we're all dealing with now is, even though we all understand that humans are terrible and humans are bigoted and humans are tribal, we always assume...
But infinitely amusing.
Terribly amusing. Thank you, God, for that. But we always assumed that America was the great exception, that we were the land of the free and the home of the brave, where we would never allow bigotry to find a home.
Now Anne Frank would be a dreamer.
Yeah.
Or detained.
Or something like that.
Or detained.
And we're all dealing with the fact that that might not have been correct. I guess I should, before we get to your questions, a couple more from me. This is a pretty fraught political moment. This is going to be broadcast on HBO pretty soon. It's going to get a lot of press. I'm sure there are people who are going to take this show as direct commentary on our current time.
Like who, for example? Like Stephen Miller?
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
Wonderland.
Did you guys think about that? I mean, David.
Yes, I have a few.
It's such an
people
incredibly
I'm-
unfortunate circumstance that this is airing early in the election cycle.
Yeah, terrible.
I don't know how. I mean,
gonna watch
usually HBO thinks about this programming stuff, and
love Lindbergh.
I think something must have slipped.
Yeah. I think you're ready for it, David. I follow your Twitter feed. If you don't, you should. You'll be like that kid in Jurassic Park when the Tyrannosaurus eats the goat and he goes, "I didn't realize there'd be so much blood." I recommend it. Anyway, but seriously, you guys you're actors, you're not the person you play, but there are people who might say, "Oh, Winona Ryder, John Turturro, they're doing this anti-Trump project. Aren't they terrible?" Do you care?
Apparently, because I'm not on social media, but like I think my parents get Google alerts about me or something. And so apparently I said a few things on the red carpet last night.
You made Breitbart. You're in Breitbart.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Wow.
That's like
Wow,
a
I
badge
really
of honor,
look up to
right?
you.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
But like,
I don't know anything.
I've been told
The worst thing that happens to them is when they're in love with someone, like they really, really love an actress, and then she says something that makes it harder for them to do that.
Yeah.
Nothing makes them hate you more than that.
I read one of them, and they said, "Well, 62 million people are going to boycott Stranger Things, so there."
And you know what? No, they're not.
They're not.
They're all.
They're not. They're still going to watch it. I don't agree.
The algorithm owns them. They can't possibly resist.
Yeah, I know.
That's right. It's been algorithmed to death.
Yeah.
That's right.
One last question for me, and then I think we have some questions.
But it is now. I just want to say, I mean, it's now or never. It's enough.
Yeah, now or never.
Like, you have to take a stand. You have to. At this point, you have to. Like, you can't just sit back and not want to be disliked or have someone not want to see your show.
Yeah.
If you have cause to remember our little mini-series at any point in the future, if any of you watch it and you have cause to remember it when you're going into the voting booth. Why not?
And this is my last question, and it's for David, but anyone can chime in, which is, I'm trying to make this not a spoiler. If you've read the book, there's this terrible change of history. Lindbergh becomes president, these things happen, and then it's over. And things more or less go back to normal, and we hear that history progresses in the way that we remember it. The miniseries has a much more ambiguous ending, and I won't give it away. Was that a conscious decision on your part?
Oh, yeah.
And where did it come from?
Without giving it away as well.
I don't think we have to. Do we have to worry about that?
Do we have to worry about
Giving
spoiling?
it away?
Well,
I don't know.
If you don't want to talk
They
about it,
haven't
don't.
seen it.
No, there's a.
Oh, okay.
You guys.
Don't tell them.
You know how actors are? They only like mark their own lines, and so they actually don't know the ending of it.
No.
No, they know. We played around with the ending, and there are some. We are speaking to something, which is a question of: is there a moment where, outside of the framework, if you're in a nation of laws, because this is a piece about. It's also a piece about how fragile democracy really is. And it seems as if it's a certitude because we've lived in this country our whole lives and we've taken certain norms for granted. But it's actually an incredibly fragile way of doing business for self-governance. Churchill, that great liberal said, democracy is the worst form of government until you consider all the others. And that's pretty apt. It's really hard to do this. It's quotidian. It never works perfectly. Freedom is never perfected. There's never enough of it to go around for everybody. Every day you got to get up, you got to kill a few more snakes. If you don't kill enough snakes, there's more tomorrow. That's the way democracy works. That's as well as it works. It doesn't, and it's never over. The fight is never sort of complete. Whereas if you stop fighting, you lose it. It's that fragile. Right. And so on some fundamental basis, it felt like an interesting thing at the end of the piece to suggest what happens when a nation of laws no longer is a nation of laws, when you can't rely on the fundamental norms to secure basic civil liberties or basic standards of the republic. And so we played around with that idea of, at what point does resistance and rebellion become either necessary or even plausible? And so that's kind of, it's a question. By the way, it's there in, it's Julius Caesar, if you're reading, if we're quoting Shakespeare, as you actor people seem to be fond of doing.
He did it so effortlessly.
I went to Yale.
I can hang. I've read a few. But I mean, there's something to be played with there, and we sort of did. So.
We have about 10 more minutes, and I have some of your questions. One person wanted to know, David, about your collaboration to the extent that you did with Philip Roth as you pursued this project before his death in 2018.
I met with him for an hour and a half. I showed up on the day after they gave, is it Ishikawa?
Kazuo Ishiguro.
Yeah, Ishiguro. They gave him the Nobel Prize. So being an asshole from Baltimore, I felt the need to make a joke about it right away. Upon meeting Philip Roth at his door, I said, "Who's this other guy with your prize?" And I thought I had him for a moment, and without missing a beat, he said, "At least they didn't give it to Peter, Paul, and Mary," because he was still mad about Dylan the year before. But then he had a few things that he really wanted to convey, a few mistakes he didn't want us to make, and we didn't. I understood what he was saying about certain things. And then I wanted a little bit of permission to play with some of the things at the end because I felt like for a miniseries I had to. There were things that worked as a novel that didn't quite work as 6 hours of television. But by and large, he was so astute about what was analogous to this current political moment and what was not, and what we should be wary of. And I mean, the one note that he gave me that I was really conscious of was the family, the Levin family should be assimilating so fast it makes your head spin. There should be no question that they were Americans, and they had become Americans within a generation and a half. That was important. He said, don't make them, don't make them Orthodox, of course. Don't lay on tons of Yiddishkeit. Don't, I reserved a place for Winona to say, "Get cockin' off and yam."
One.
She does what?
Yeah.
Don't ruin it. Don't ruin it.
No.
Okay.
That was my.
No, you asked for it.
Secret wish to be.
You asked for it. You got it. She held out for that line, but by and large, it was important because what he was saying was the whole lie of, oh my God, they won't become Americans like we're Americans, which is now exactly what you hear about, the Mexican rapists and gang members and the Syrians who we can't possibly let in because they're terrorists. And what he was saying was, you have to put that lie to bed right away. The Jews of Wequahic, and my family, we were Americans. And so there's a moment early on in oh, you just saw it. You saw the first episode. Thank you. But there's a moment where they're doing the Kiddush and the motzi at Friday night dinner, and it's that residual bit of Jewish ritual that even the secular families still maintain. And in the middle of the motzi, the kid's making the motzi, and they start talking about the Yankee game. And that's purposeful. That's us saying, make no mistake, they're Americans, and they've arrived, and the old country is behind them. And it's sort of important.
And it was Roth who asked you to change the name of the family.
Yeah, he did.
But not Yankee. Like that wasn't.
Oh, Jesus. Okay. Are you going to start this again?
No.
Just, Dodger fan. Sorry. She's exhausting.
And David, how nervous were you upon meeting Philip Roth?
I believe the quote in the New York Times was, do you have the quote?
I have the quote. Do you want me to read it?
I don't really.
So David Simon says to the New York Times about meeting Philip Roth, "I was so nervous you couldn't have pulled a pin out of my ass with a tractor."
Good line.
MacArthur
Right.
genius, ladies and gentlemen.
Actually,
Tractor.
A tractor. That's what
actually,
makes it.
I can tell you that that's a very standard Baltimore City quote, and I was misquoted. By
You were misquoted. What did you actually say?
You couldn't pull a pin out of my ass with a John Deere tractor.
Oh,
I worked that quote.
I can tell. We got a question as well. In addition to the book, what research did any or all of you do? Did you look at anything else? Did you watch films, read books? You said you read Sinclair Lewis's novel. Did any of you do any other research?
I had this weird thing of trying to I'm kind of a World War II, for lack of a better word, buff. Like I sort of read and I don't know, I've always been fascinated by it. And anyway, I had to kind of like lobotomize my brain because from all the stuff that I knew had happened after.
Right.
Because it hadn't happened
Because
yet.
Evelyn didn't know any of that.
And that was really difficult, having the family history that I do. I had to really actually, avoid watching, all that is available on YouTube and in films, because most of it is post 1940, 41. So it was really a really strange thing. But in other parts of my, performance, I did sort of a backstory, as we do, and David gave me a great piece of direction or advice or thing because my first day of shooting was the scene with Angelo, and I was like, I was nervous. It was my first day, but.
That was your first day? They threw you in the bed in your first day?
But you're like, you've had this fight 1,000 times. Like that me and Angelo had been doing it and having this fight, and this had been going on a long time. And instead of this is because I think in the beginning I was playing it completely shocked that but that was very helpful. And I had my little tricks up my sleeve of what Evelyn thought. I think when she goes to bed at night, I always like to think about that with characters, how does she really feel? And that was really interesting.
Really?
When you get later into the story with Bengelsdorf. And I think it's just absolute denial. And it's a bunch of things. It's always with it's always a million different things, but just denial and fear and arrogance and But I don't mean to take up the time.
Morgan, did you do any research into playing this role?
Yeah, I mean, it's rare that you have the luxury of having an entire book written about the character you're playing, but I got to go, I went back and read Patrimony again, which was a pleasure. It's one of my favorite of Roth's books.
Yeah.
But I mean, Herman Levin is not that character entirely, but there was tons to draw on. I also read World of Our Fathers by Irving Howe. It's sort of a major history of Eastern European Jewish immigration and to basically through the Lower East Side in the beginning of the 20th century, just to get a sense of sort of who Herman's parents would have been, who the previous generation had been, and how, what the conditions of his childhood kind of would have been. And that was also really useful. Just a wonderful book. So
I love that book.
yeah, it's a great book.
This would probably have to be the last question, but it's a general one, and if all of you want to chime in, which is that what do you want people to take away from this, having seen this?
I also want to mention that with John, when you mentioned Rumkowski to me, that you had read you were channeling Rumkowski into Bengelsdorf, I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah.
Well,
And Primo Levi was.
I mean, I think that's, that's something that that we shared, and that really was very helpful,
Yeah.
I mean, I had a nice experience when I was doing research because I went down to Charleston, South Carolina, and was introduced to the Jewish community down there, and they really embraced me and gave me a lot of books about the Civil War. And
They embraced you.
Oh yeah, it was really helpful. It was really fascinating, and all the things that were in the book. And David and I discussed it at length. And people had slaves. They fought for the Confederacy. I mean, it's really fascinating. And even the history of the Klan. That the Klan was not originally anti-Semitic. It became anti-Semitic. They told me, because they were business owners. So if you were a business owner, you also, could have participated and did, So it's, once again, like David said, you're becoming an American in a certain place at a certain time.
Right.
And I think that's kind of a fascinating.
Can I just say, as our greatest Sicilian Jewish actor, or a Sicilian actor playing Jewish parts, he'd already done Bernie Birnbaum, Herbie Stemple, Primo Levi. Like, at this point, the only thing you can do if you cast him in another Jewish part is make him a rabbi. That's a new level.
That's another level.
And give him a Southern accent. I feel as if.
It was in the book.
So it's okay. Now, I'm not saying we took liberties. I'm just saying, as I feel as if
I'm a person of the word. If you're Sicilian, you're really, you're like got 25 different things.
I was just thinking, in the hierarchy of Jews that you've played, you've reached now rabbi.
Well, I've gone up there.
Yeah, I know. You've been very,
appearing next year in the one-man play of Ben Gurion.
Yes. But I was actually thinking the only more prestigious Jewish man you could play is Jesus, and you've done that.
Well, I have to say, one of my favorite actors growing up was Edward G. Robinson, and he played so many Italians.
Yeah,
and I always thought he was Italian.
You're just getting even.
I mean, Emmanuel Goldberg,
Yes.
and in House of Strangers, he spoke fluent Italian, and I guess people grew up side by side, so it's.
You're getting even.
I'm just continuing my relationship with Edward G.
Is there anything you want to share with the audience before we let them go into this good night about this project, or what you want them to see or hope that they see? Or
Just vote.
Yeah, I guess as we were talking earlier, it just made me think about how precious democracy is. Violence is horrible. Even those of us who talk about, we need a revolution in this country, violent revolution, it doesn't work out. There's blood in the streets and actual conflict. I mean, all these guys cosplaying in Virginia with their firearms, it's really obscene. The idea that this sort of notion of a new civil war, it's truly, we haven't had that here in a long time. I think it's easy to forget how brutal and horrible that is, and how easily it could happen. And so the idea that we can still solve our problems, we can still, in theory, replace this president or whoever through democratic means, or solve the problems that face us today through democratic means, we need to seize that as long as we can, because it isn't guaranteed.
You're right.
Well said.
Before we end, I wanted to call out some people who are here in the audience. These are not the only actors from this project who are here. The young men who play the Levin children are both here. So Eji Robinson and
bravo.
Malik are here. Where are you guys? There they are.
And
Caleb Malice.
Sorry, it's that, yes. Caleb Malice as well, of course, sorry. And I also wanted to give some credit to David's producing partner going back to the corner. Nina Noble is here. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here tonight. Thanks to John Turturro, Morgan Spector, Winona Ryder, and Mr. David Simon. Good night, everybody.